I'm 76 years old. I've followed God for 50 years, and I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you coming from a man of faith. For most of those 50 years, I wasn't sure he was even there. I did everything a faithful man is supposed to do. Church on Sundays, prayer before meals, Bible by the bedside. But deep down, in the quiet moments when nobody was watching, I had doubts that would have shocked the people sitting next to me in the pews. What I'm about to share with you is the moment that changed everything, the proof I spent half a century looking for, and it came in a way I never expected. I didn't grow up in a religious home. My parents were good people, honest, hard-working, but Sunday mornings were for sleeping in and reading the newspaper. God wasn't part of our vocabulary. I didn't step inside a church until I was 26 years old, and even then, it wasn't by choice. In 1976, my life fell apart. I'd been married to Florence for 2 years, and I thought we had things under control. Then I lost my job at the mill when they cut the third shift. 3 weeks later, Florence's mother passed away suddenly. And 2 months after that, we got an eviction notice because I couldn't keep up with rent. I remember sitting in my car one night, parked outside our apartment, and I couldn't go inside. I didn't want Florence to see me like that. Broken, hands shaking, no plan, no money, no answers. A man I worked with at the mill, older guy named Otis, had been inviting me to his church for months. Every lunch he'd say, "Come on out this Sunday, Eugene, can't hurt." I always said no. But that night, sitting in that car with nowhere else to turn, I decided I'd go. Not because I believed, because I was desperate. I wish I could tell you I felt God's presence immediately. It didn't happen like that. The sermon was fine, the people were kind, but I didn't feel anything miraculous. What I felt was something quieter. I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this. That was enough to bring me back the next week, and the week after, and slowly, over months, something shifted. I started praying, not fancy prayers, just talking out loud in my car on the way to job interviews, asking for help, and things started to change. Not overnight, but piece by piece. I found work at a warehouse. We found a better apartment. Florence started smiling again. Our son Paul came along in 79, and our daughter Karen in 81. Life felt like it was building towards something good. I gave God the credit for all of it, and for the first 10 years, my faith was simple and strong. I believed because things were moving in the right direction. I believed because prayer felt like it worked. But here's what nobody warns you about faith. It's easy to believe when things are going well. The real test comes when they stop. In 1989, Karen was diagnosed with leukemia. She was 8 years old, the most joyful child you ever met. She used to sing hymns around the house, little songs from Sunday school, and her voice had this brightness that could fill up every room. Even strangers noticed it. Her teacher once told Florence that Karen was the kind of child who made other children feel brave. When the doctors told us, Florence collapsed right there in the hallway. I held her up, but inside I was falling apart just the same. That night, after the kids were asleep, I got on my knees in the kitchen and prayed harder than I'd ever prayed. I begged, I bargained. I told God He could take anything from me, my health, my job, my years, just not her. She fought for 14 months. There were stretches of good days followed by terrible ones, moments when her numbers improved and I'd thank God and tell people at church He was healing her. I said it out loud in front of the whole congregation. Karen died in March of 1991. She was 10 years old. I need you to understand what that does to a person of faith. You spend years telling yourself God is good, that He has a plan, that He protects His children. And then you watch your child die in a hospital bed while you're holding her hand, and every word you've ever believed turns to ash in your mouth. I didn't leave the church, not right away. I kept going because Florence needed it, because Paul needed stability. He was 12, and his world had just shattered, but I was hollow inside. I heard the sermons about God's love, and all I could think was, where was that love when my little girl was in pain? That wasn't a passing doubt. It lasted years, nearly a decade of going through the motions, praying words I didn't believe, singing songs that felt like lies, standing in church with my hands raised while inside I felt absolutely nothing. I looked around at the other faces in those pews and wondered how many of them were pretending too. How many of them smiled on Sunday and fell apart on Monday. Florence knew. One night, must have been 97 or 98, she sat next to me on the porch and said, "Eugene, you can be angry at God. He can take it, but don't pretend with me, not after everything we've been through together." So I told her the truth, that I didn't know if I believed anymore. That losing Karen had broken something inside me I didn't know how to fix. That I felt like a fraud every Sunday morning. She didn't argue. She didn't quote scripture. She just took my hand and said, "Then we'll sit in the not knowing together." That's the kind of woman Florence is. The years kept going. Paul grew up, got married, had a daughter of his own. I kept attending church, mostly out of habit, partly because some small, stubborn piece of me wasn't ready to let go completely. But I was different. I prayed less. I listened to sermons with a skeptic's ear, and if you'd asked me whether I truly believed, I would have said, I want to, but wanting and believing aren't the same thing. In 2014, Florence had a stroke. Left side, partial paralysis. The doctors said the first 72 hours would tell us everything. I sat beside her bed in the ICU, and for the first time in years, I prayed and meant it. Not a polite prayer, a desperate, ugly one. I know I've been distant, I know I've been angry, but please don't take her too. Florence recovered, slowly, painfully, but she came back. And I thanked God, but carefully, quietly, because I'd thanked him before when Karen's numbers improved, and I remembered how that ended. I was afraid to trust him fully again. Can you understand that? 50 years of following God, and I was afraid to trust him. That's not something you hear in sermons. Now the proof, the thing that changed everything, it didn't come in a hospital room or a church service. It came on a regular Tuesday afternoon in 2023. Paul called me. He'd been going through a rough stretch, problems at work, stress in his marriage, the kind of weight that bends a person slowly. He sounded exhausted, and during the conversation, he said something that stopped me cold. He said, "Dad, I almost didn't call anyone. I was sitting in my truck after work, and I felt completely alone. And then I remembered something you told me when I was a kid. You said, when you don't know where to go, just start by talking to somebody. God or a person doesn't matter, just don't sit alone in the dark." He paused and said, "So I thought, I'm going to call my dad." I couldn't speak because I remembered saying those words. It was during the months after Karen died. Paul was 12, struggling, angry, not sleeping. I didn't have any wisdom to offer. I was barely holding myself together. But one night, I sat on the edge of his bed and said those words. I don't even know where they came from. I wasn't speaking from strength. I was speaking from the emptiest place I'd ever been. But those words survived. They traveled through 32 years and reached my son at the exact moment he needed them. Then Paul told me his daughter Sophie had been going through a hard time at school. Bullying, loneliness, the kind of pain that feels like the end of the world when you're 15. And he'd sat with her one night and said the same thing I'd told him. Don't sit alone in the dark. Talk to somebody. 3 generations. Words I spoke out of my emptiness became the thing that carried my son through his darkness. And then he passed them to his daughter. That was the proof. Not a voice from heaven, not a miracle on demand. The proof was that God had been working through the brokenness the entire time. Through every hollow prayer, every angry night, every Sunday, I sat feeling nothing. He was there, planting seeds in the darkest soil I had, in places I couldn't see. I lost my daughter. That will never be okay. I will carry that grief until the day I die, and I don't expect God to explain it. But I understand now what I couldn't understand then. My faith wasn't destroyed by losing Karen. It was reshaped, broken open and rebuilt into something honest enough to hold the full weight of a real life. The simple faith I had in my early years wouldn't have survived what came later. It had to be torn down to make room for something stronger. 50 years. That's how long it took me to see that faith isn't about getting what you pray for. It's about discovering that even in the worst of it, something is quietly at work. Something is carrying your words forward. Something is using the pain you can't make sense of to build bridges you won't see for decades. I'm 76 now. Florence and I have been married 52 years. She still moves a little slower on her left side, but she still makes me laugh every single day. Paul calls every Sunday, and Sophie is finishing high school this year. She told me she wants to study counseling. She wants to help young people who feel alone. The seeds keep growing. That's the proof. Not one dramatic moment, but a pattern that only becomes visible when you step back far enough to see it. If you're in a season of doubt right now, I'm not going to tell you to pray harder or have more faith. I'm going to tell you what Florence told me on that porch. Sit in the not knowing. Be honest about it. Stay, even when it's hard. Because the proof might not come on your timeline. It might take decades, but when it finally comes, you'll see it was there all along, woven into every moment you were sure God had forgotten about you. He didn't forget you. I'm 76 years old, and that's the one thing I know for certain. If this meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me about your own journey. And subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories to tell. More people who've lived long enough to see what the rest of us are still too close to see. If you're struggling right now with faith, with loss, with doubt, just remember you're not sitting alone in the dark. You never were.